What goes into the cost of things that we buy? What makes things cost something in the first place? On the surface, this seems like an obvious question. I mean, somebody had to work to get that thing, so you had to pay them for that work. This kind of theory's been around for a long time. In Adam Smith's 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations, he said, "The real price of everything, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it." In other words, it takes a lot of work to make a thing, and all the people who do that work have to get paid. When Henry Ford created his version of the assembly line, they were able to make vehicles a lot more quickly. As a result, it was less labor per vehicle, and they were able to decline the cost of that vehicle. Hence mass production, and then all of a sudden, vehicles no longer had to be only in the hands of the rich. But what happens when human labor is no longer required to bring you that item? What happens when AI-powered robots that are fueled by sustainable energy are doing all the work? What happens when those robots learn to build other robots? What happens when general artificial intelligence is able to take over all the human processes involved in bringing you a product, and robots are able to do the labor, and the energy comes from sustainable power, like solar and wind? What happens when those robots figure out how to make new solar and wind farms and battery storage? What happens when those AI-controlled robots master agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and logistics? Now, an optimistic perspective of this is that we could have everything we want with no human toil involved in creating it. There are also scarier scenarios, in which case maybe some business person who controls all the AI gets to have everything and doesn't bother leaving anything for anyone else. Or if the artificial intelligence decides that the Earth would be better off without humans. What happens if a runaway emotionless AI decides that the best course of action is to turn the Earth into a giant battery that it can use the energy from to create a wormhole to jump into other parts of space? This line of thinking is fraught with problems. But what if we managed to come out of this in a really great position? What if we were able to use this technology to assure that we had abundance for all? What if we used this technology to eliminate poverty? What if we used this technology to solve death and suffering? What if we were able to use this technology to expand our consciousness and gain a clearer perspective about how the universe works and our place in it? What if we could live in abundance without the need for toil and strife? I call this optimistic great case scenario Technotopia, a world of abundance. This to me seems like a wonderful scenario, but it's so fraught with challenges and hang-ups that it's certainly more than reasonable to question whether or not it's even worth striving towards. I mean, is this even possible? And if so, how? What kind of challenges and roadblocks might be along the way, and how do we avoid them? How do we assure this future is inclusive and kind and doesn't leave life behind? Given the current trajectory of technology, it seems like we're on course to some kind of AI and robotics-driven future. And if that's the direction this whole thing's going, we might as well make sure it's a good one. Now, if we're going to work on making a better future, we might as well start right now. I'm going to start by making a donation to Rainforest Trust. Rainforest Trust protects endangered rainforests by purchasing and protecting them. You can visit rainforesttrust.org to make your own donation. For every like this video gets, I'll donate another 1 cent to Rainforest Trust, and for every subscription, I'll donate another 2. So how could these changes be possible, and how could they potentially take place within our lifetimes? Removing the element of human involvement can really speed up the rate of change. And the rate of change matters a lot. Robots will eventually be able to build new robots. AI will eventually be able to train new AI. These systems never need to sleep, and over time will not be limited by human pace, but instead by things like computational power, access to energy, and the laws of physics. At that point, the current state-of-the-art technology will not be so for long, as improvements will be able to stack on top of each other, each building upon the last, building upon the chains of knowledge, processes, and products that came before them. Let's take this rate of growth to the extreme. Imagine it's 2050. AI has the kind of computational power we can't even imagine today. And that computational power is increasing at an exponential rate. You have a factory that is run by super smart robots, and their primary job is to build more, even smarter robots. Let's start this factory with 25 robots. If for every week that passes, the robots can build 10% more of themselves than they already have, in week 1 they could build 2.5 robots. In week 2 they could build about 2.75 robots. In week 3 they could build about 3 robots. By the end of the year, they'd have 3,500 robots. By the end of the second year, they'd have over 500,000 robots. But so far we haven't factored in that through this process, they aim to make the new robots even smarter. The smarter robots can observe their processes and seek out improvements. Imagine if they could find ways of improving every element of production at a rapid rate. Let's imagine that these robots can improve their rate of production at 10% per week. This leads to a total compounded growth rate of 20%. After another 2 years at that rate, you'd have over 85 trillion robots. Imagine if this was happening with AI systems and hardware of all kinds. Imagine if these AI systems kept improving at an accelerated rate until they optimized for the laws of physics. It's like I'm not predicting this specific scenario. It's kind of a strange and extreme example, but I'm presenting how once things become detached from human restraints and ingenuity, innovation could hypothetically move at a pace that's hard for us to grasp. This kind of scenario is like the one that futurist Ray Kurzweil calls the singularity. In mathematics, the singularity is when a function takes on an infinite value, especially in space-time when matter is infinitely dense as at the center of a black hole. Kurzweil uses the term to describe when artificial intelligence far surpass human beings as the smartest and most capable life forms on Earth. I relate his use of the term the singularity to the math term by imagining when technological growth takes on this infinite value, where growth is accelerating at a rate that is more easily understood as infinite, meaning that the number is boundless and larger than any real or natural number. And thus things may change very rapidly. Kurzweil's been making predictions about the future for decades, and many of his predictions used to sound ridiculous, like us carrying around wireless, super powerful computers that allow us to communicate using video images. But now that most, though not all, of his predictions have come to pass, we adjust to finding them normal. Yet his predictions for the future remain crazy sounding. For example, solving death, or even more wild seeming. In his book The Singularity is Near, he predicts that sometime after 2045, AIs convert more and more of the Earth's matter into engineered computational substrate capable of supporting more AIs, until the whole Earth is one gigantic computer, except for a few nature reserves set aside on the planetary surface. You know, for those humans who decide to remain in their natural state. Then he goes on to predict the same thing happening with all the matter and energy of the universe. Is anyone else getting Guardians of the Galaxy 2 Ego the Living Planet vibes? Call me crazy, but my preference would not be that the Earth become an engineered computational substrate. Maybe let's use other planets, you know, ones without living beings on them for this. Elon, keep building those rockets. Let's take it back to a level that's a little more tangible in the not too distant future. In Jeremy Rifkin's 2014 book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, he explains that the cost of things isn't so much inherent to the thing, it's mainly the marginal cost that we are paying for. Think of your furnace as the fixed cost and the oil that goes into it as the marginal cost. The marginal cost, oil, keeps having to be burned and replaced, while something like a solar panel by comparison has almost zero marginal cost after it's been installed. But the process that gets that solar panel onto your roof still has many marginal costs given the current state of technology, like the gasoline in the vehicles that mine for the materials that go into your solar panel. In the future, those vehicles will be electric, powered by near zero marginal cost, solar and wind, or feeding and paying the driver in that vehicle, where in the future, that vehicle will be self-driving. Rifkin's idea is that with sustainable power, AI, robots, etc., we can gradually remove all those marginal costs, and the cost of goods could hypothetically go down dramatically. My background is in music, and I remember when CDs were the thing. Back then, you had to duplicate and distribute each album physically before someone could listen to it. Now, the cost of multiplying and duplicating that music is near zero, as it is all done digitally. Rifkin explains that the process that was happening with music in the 90s, when it was digitized, is now moving through all parts of our economy. This could eventually mean that the cost of almost anything you want could be significantly lower than it is now, and be way more available to people who don't have significant financial wealth. Imagine if what happened with music and information back in the 90s happened with physical things like clothing, food, and even housing. Now, the housing thing seems like a bit of a stretch in a way, because it depends on the land and the location. If we have autonomous vehicles that can rapidly move us around without us having to drive, that means we could live outside of downtown, and say if we wanted to go out and drink, we could go home without having to drive ourselves or even take a cab. And the cost will eventually be remarkably low. Already, the cost per mile of electric vehicles is way less than an internal combustion engine vehicle. They require way less maintenance, they don't require any gasoline. Plus, as more of these zero marginal costs converge on something like a vehicle, the cost of that is going to go down dramatically. So maybe you choose to live on a mountain by a waterfall. Well, in that scenario, there could be tunnels that have hyperloops that just transport your vehicle really fast into the city. And while it sounds kind of futuristic and far out, a lot can change over the next few decades. The Boring Company, which is a company that digs tunnels that is created by Elon Musk, has been working to dramatically lower the cost of tunneling, which seems kind of random and bizarre, but when you put it in the context of this zero marginal cost society, it actually could be really incredible. You can go many layers deep with tunnels. You don't have to stay in the same plane as everything else. Our roads are pretty much just flat with earth. You know, sometimes we have an overpass or a bridge. For the most part, it's just one level driving. With tunnels, you could go hundreds of layers deep and you wouldn't really have too many problems. You also wouldn't be disturbing nearly as much nature because you can cut right through there without disturbing the life that's on the surface. As the cost of this tunneling comes down, and if those tunnels are dug autonomously using sustainable power, you could make a lot of these things. things, and they could be going all over the place. And because you could essentially solve traffic with something like this, you could move way more quickly. This paired alongside with autonomous vehicles, this would mean that you could live further outside of a city and still enjoy most of the benefits of being there. Autonomous vehicles will also be able to park themselves, so that'll free up parking in downtown areas. That can make a big difference in terms of how our space is used. We could use that for more housing downtown, or we could use that for other cool attractions and fun things to do. Or maybe it allows us to bring a little bit more nature into these urban areas. If you want to take a deep dive down the potential of our autonomous future, check out the Our Autonomous Future YouTube series put out by the channel Now You Know. Zach and Jesse did a really good job of painting a picture of what the future could look like with self-driving cars. But we have, as of yet in this discussion, failed to consider some other costs. The real input costs aren't necessarily measured in dollars and cents. They may be better measured in materials and opportunities and even things like emotions. I think I'd personally be happier knowing there was a frog jumping off a water lily in the jungle than that frog be converted into a computational substrate. Call me crazy, but I value this world and the rich tapestry of life that's on it, including what might be my favorite animal, the human. But I have to admit, as much as I am a fan of many aspects of our current economic system, it does fail to account for most things other than human labor and human profits. All that other stuff, pretty much everything in existence, yeah, that's basically free. We might have to figure that part out to reach a true technotopia. But regardless of all the potential doomsday scenarios outlined here, I feel like the only choice we have is informed optimism. By allowing ourselves to imagine the ways that this future could be wonderful, we can start taking the actions required to make it so. I've created this channel to present and test out ideas that could contribute to a world of abundance, where you can ideally have everything you want, with little or no negative impact to the world or those around you. This seems worthwhile. The ideas in these videos are based on my current ways of thinking, and I reserve the right to change and improve. I look forward to participating in kind and thoughtful discussion in the comments. Let me know what you think. What does an ideal future look like to you? And how do we get there?